"There's nobody home in that one," the man beside me said, loud enough for the whole rope line to hear, and he laughed at his own joke the way men do when they've decided the joke is the truth. I had only been in the forecourt of the Hartlin Gate 10 minutes, and already I disliked him. He wore a cream linen jacket that had cost more than my flight, and he had the kind of voice that fills a square whether you want it to or not. He was talking about the sentry, the one nearest us, standing his box in the red wool and the tall black bearskin white gloves crossed on the rifle, eyes forward at nothing, still as the stone he stood on. "Look at it," the man went on, lifting his phone to film the guard's face. "No one in there. They hollow them out and prop them up. It's a costume on a coat stand. Could be a mannequin for all you'd know." His wife, or whoever she was, told him to leave the poor man alone, and he said, "It's not a man, that's my point," and a few people near us tittered, because the morning was warm and the line was long, and a man being mocked who couldn't answer back is the cheapest entertainment there is. I am not from here. I had come for a wedding 2 towns over and stopped in the capital for the day because everyone said you had to see the changing of the watch at the Hartlin Gate at least once, the way you have to see a famous painting once even if you don't know what you're looking at. I had a paper cup of coffee going cold in my hand and a camera I barely knew how to use, and I had taken exactly one photograph of the sentry, because he was the most striking thing in the square, and because there was something about how completely he did not move that made you want to keep a record of it, as if to prove to yourself later that a person could really stand like that. The man in the linen jacket, I never learned his name, so in my head he stayed the loud man asterisk, and I'll call him that, was working himself up. He'd found an audience and an easy target, and he wasn't going to waste either. He stepped to the very edge of the rope, close as you're allowed, and waved his hand in front of the guard's eyes. "Hello, anybody? Knock knock." He snapped his fingers. He coughed a fake cough right at him. The guard's eyes did not flick. His face did not change. A muscle at his jaw might have been carved there for all the give it had. "See," the loud man said, turning to us delighted. "Dead inside. They train it out of them, or there was never anything in to begin with. It's the same job as a traffic cone, just dressed up." He laughed again. "I'd respect it more if it'd just admit it. Mate, you in there. Blink once for yes." A woman near me said quietly to no one, "Why does he have to do that?" And an older man with a folded newspaper said, "Because no one's stopping him." And neither of them stopped him either, and neither did I. That is the part I think about most after. The guard stood in the middle of a crowd of 40 or 50 people, and not one of us said a word in his defense, because we had all silently agreed with the loud man on one thing, even those of us who found him distasteful. We agreed that there was no one in there to defend. He was furniture. He was the postcard. He was the thing you photographed and walked past. Whatever was under the bearskin had been so completely emptied out by training that it didn't count. And so the loud man could say what he liked, and it wasn't really cruelty, because cruelty needs a someone on the other end, and there was no someone there. That was the morning's settled opinion of the man in the red tunic. I want you to understand how completely we all believed it, because of what happened next. The square in front of the Hartlin Gate is a wide forecourt of pale stone, worn smooth in 2 long grooves where 10,000 boots a year have marched the same line. There are gilded iron railings, a row of 3 sentry boxes painted black and gold, and beyond them the gate itself, all carved stone and a crest no one in the crowd could have named. Tourists pool along the rope on the near side. Pigeons work the gaps. A vendor 2 streets back sells flags and little plastic bearskins for children to wear. It is, on a warm day, a pleasant and slightly silly place, a place that takes itself seriously surrounded by people who don't. I mention all this because the next thing that happened low down, near the cobblestones, where none of the adults were looking. There was a family further along the rope, a mother, a grandmother, and a small girl, maybe 5 years old, in a yellow sun hat with a strap under her chin. The girl had been quiet and good for as long as small children are quiet and good, which is to say not very long, and at some point she had crouched down to look at the pigeons, and then to look at a particularly interesting crack in the stone, and then, the way small children do, she had drifted. Not far. A few steps. But a few steps at the Hartlin Gate takes you out of the press of legs and right up against the rope. And the rope, at the corner, sags, and a small determined person can go under a sagging rope without anyone tall noticing at all. I noticed because I'd been watching the guard, and so I was looking that way when she appeared, suddenly, on the wrong side. Inside the rope. On the swept stone the public never sets foot on. A little yellow figure standing about 6 feet from the sentry box of the man. The loud man had just finished calling a coat stand. I'll be honest, my first feeling was fear. Not for her exactly, for the moment. I'd read the signs in the square, the polished discipline, the sense that everything here ran on rules I didn't know, and I thought, she's not allowed there, something is going to go wrong, a guard is going to shout, or worse. The loud man saw her too and went quiet for once, lifting his phone again, sensing content. The whole near end of the rope line went still in that way crowds do when they smell that something is about to happen, and they don't want to miss it. The little girl didn't sense any of it. She walked right up to the front of the sentry box, tipped her head all the way back to look up at the enormous still man in the towering black hat, and said, in the clear carrying voice of a child who has not yet learned that the world is listening, "Are you real?" Nobody laughed. I think we all expected the same thing. The loud man had been performing for 10 minutes, nothing. No answer. The statue stares through her. The wonderful joke of it, the guard who won't react even for a baby. The loud man was already grinning, already framing the shot. The guard did not answer her with words. He couldn't. I learned later there are strict rules about that, and he kept them. But he did something that none of us were prepared for, something so small that if you'd blinked you'd have missed it, and so enormous that the woman beside me made a sound in her throat like she'd been touched. He looked down. Just his eyes. The great head did not move, the rifle did not move, the boots did not move. But the eyes that had stared at nothing through 10 minutes of a grown man waving and snapping and coughing in his face came down, slowly, deliberately, and found the small upturned face under the yellow hat and stopped there. And held. You would have to have seen the 10 minutes before it to understand what those eyes coming down meant. We had watched a man be a statue against every cheap trick a bored adult could throw. We had agreed there was no one home. And then a 5-year-old asked one true question, and someone came to the window. "Are you real?" she asked again, because she hadn't gotten an answer in words, and small children are nothing if not persistent. And the corner of the guard's mouth, I swear this on everything, moved, a quarter of an inch. The smallest possible kindness a disciplined face can give without breaking. It was not a smile. It was the place a smile starts. But it was unmistakable, and it was aimed entirely at her, and the little girl saw it, and her whole body lit up like she'd found a secret, and she said, "You are real," with the triumph of a scientist who has proved a great theory, and the guard's eyes crinkled at the corners, just slightly, in the way eyes do when a man is keeping a laugh down hard. I heard the loud man's grin fall off his face. He didn't say anything. He just stopped filming, lowered his phone an inch, because the joke had changed under him and he hadn't given it permission to. A young woman in a household sergeant's uniform was already moving, quick and quiet, coming along the inside of the rope toward the girl. To retrieve her, I understood, to lift her gently back over to her family before anything came of a child being inside the line. I tensed again. This, I thought, is where the warmth ends and the rules come down. But before the sergeant reached her, the little girl did the thing that I have told 100 people about since, and that not one of them has quite believed. She had been holding something. A small soft toy, a gray rabbit, very worn, one ear hanging by a few threads, the kind of toy that a child has loved past the point of it being a toy and into the point of it being a person. And in the excitement of discovering that the enormous man was real, She had let go of it, and it had fallen and rolled, and come to rest against the polished black boot of the sentry, right at the edge of his box. The little girl looked at the rabbit lying against the boot of the man who must not move, and her face went from triumph to tragedy in the way only a small child's can, instantly and completely, because the rabbit was now in the most dangerous and unreachable place in the entire world, at the foot of a giant, and she could not get to it because there was a sergeant arriving, and a rope she'd already broken, and some dawning understanding that she had done a forbidden thing. Her chin began to crumple. The famous rabbit was lost. She had brought him to see the soldier, and now the soldier had him, and she would never get him back. The sergeant slowed. I could see her trying to work out the kindest way to scoop up both child and rabbit and restore order. The loud man had his phone all the way down now. And the guard. The guard moved. I have to be careful here, because what he did was so small, and the whole point of the man is the smallness of what he does, the economy of it, the discipline that lets out exactly as much as the moment requires and not one drop more. He did not bend down. He did not pick the rabbit up in his white-gloved hand and present it to her with a flourish, which is what a man in a film would do, and which would have broken every rule he stands for. The changing of the watch was not for another 20 minutes. He was on his post. The post does not bend down for a dropped toy. That is the whole of his job, to be the thing that does not bend. What he did was this. He looked at the rabbit against his boot. He looked at the crumpling face under the yellow hat. And then, with the side of his polished boot, slowly and very precisely, like a man making a single chess move he has thought about for a long time, he nudged the gray rabbit gently, so gently about 4 inches across the smooth stone, away from his box and back toward the little girl, until it was within the reach of a 5-year-old arm. That is all. He moved a toy 4 inches with his foot. A child could have done it. It cost him nothing and it broke nothing. His head never turned, his rifle never wavered, his eyes came back up to the front within the second. If you described it flatly, a man pushed a stuffed animal with his shoe, it would sound like nothing at all. But the forecourt did not take it as nothing. The forecourt took it as a thunderclap. Because we had all just spent 10 minutes agreeing that there was no one inside the red tunic. And then we had watched no one inside the red tunic notice a child's heartbreak from the corner of his eye and solve it, silently, with the only 4 inches of movement his post allowed him, asking nothing, taking no credit, his face already forward again as if it had never happened. The little girl snatched her rabbit up off the stone and hugged it so hard her hat fell back, and she looked up at the guard with the purest gratitude I have ever seen on a human face, and she whispered, and it carried, because the whole square had gone silent to hear it, she whispered, "Thank you, soldier." And the guard, eyes forward, perfectly still, the model of a man who feels nothing and notices nothing and is no one at all, the guard, very quietly, just loudly enough for the front of the rope to catch it, broke his own silence for exactly 2 words. He said, "He's safe." Then he said nothing else for a long time, and his eyes did not come down again, and he was a statue once more. But it was too late. We had all seen the window open. We knew now that there was a room behind it, and a man in the room, and a warm and watchful and kind man at that, who had been there the whole time, the entire 10 minutes, listening to himself be called a coat stand and a traffic cone and dead inside, and had given the loud man nothing, nothing at all, and had given the little girl in the yellow hat the only thing she needed in all the world, which was her rabbit back, and the knowledge that he was safe. The sergeant reached the girl then, and knelt, and I half expected even now a reprimand, but she was smiling. She said something I couldn't hear, and the girl laughed, and the sergeant lifted her, rabbit and all, and carried her back over the rope to the mother and grandmother, who had only just realized their daughter had been gone at all, and were caught between relief and embarrassment, and the strange dawning awareness, spreading through the whole crowd, that we had all just witnessed something. I looked around the square. The loud man was standing very still, for once, his phone hanging from his hand. He was looking at the guard, and his face had a complicated thing happening on it. A man rearranging a belief he'd been very comfortable holding 5 minutes ago. The older man with the newspaper had taken his hat off. I don't think he knew he'd done it. The woman beside me was wiping her eyes and pretending she wasn't. A dozen phones that had been filming the loud man's joke were now filming the still guard, who had become, in the space of 90 seconds, the most interesting man any of us had ever stood near. And I, who had taken one photograph all morning, found I had not taken a single one of the thing that mattered, because you cannot film 4 inches of a boot moving while your own heart is in your mouth. I have the photo from before, the statue with no one home. I do not have the photo of the man at the window. Maybe that's right. Maybe some things are meant to be only remembered. I want to tell you the rest of it, because there is a rest of it, and because the whole shape of what I'd seen didn't come clear to me until later, when I understood who the little girl was and who the guard was, and why a man who must not move had moved 4 inches of his boot for her, and why the loud man, of all the people in that square, was the one it changed. His name was Corporal Aldis Wren. I learned it because I stayed. Most of the crowd drifted on after the changing of the watch, the great clockwork business of the relief marching up, the password exchanged, the boots and the orders, the new sentry stepping onto the worn grooves and the old one stepping off. I watched Corporal Wren march away with his relief, immaculate, expressionless, every inch the statue again, and I thought that would be the end of it, a story I'd tell at dinner. But the little girl's family had not left either. They were over by the railing, the grandmother sitting on a low stone ledge, the mother crouched by the girl, and there was a fuss of some kind, and I am nosy, and I drifted over. The girl, her name was Posy. I heard the mother say it a dozen times, was telling the story of the rabbit and the soldier to anyone who would listen, with the embellishments getting grander each time, and the grandmother was laughing, and the mother was crying a little, in the leaking way of a person who is happy and tired both. And I, hovering, heard the mother say to another woman, she doesn't speak, hasn't not since, well, since her dad, nearly a year. The doctors say it's not her ears, it's not her voice, it's grief, it just locked up. She hasn't said a word in 11 months. I felt the ground tilt a little. She said 3 words just now, the mother went on, and her voice cracked clean across the middle of it. To a guardsman, thank you, soldier. And before that she asked him if he was real. She spoke. She asked a question, and she said thank you, and she's been talking non-stop for 10 minutes, and I don't even, and she couldn't finish it. And the other woman put an arm around her, and the grandmother reached out and held Posy's small hand very tight, and Posy, oblivious, told her rabbit the whole adventure again from the start. I understood then that I had not watched a charming little moment with a child and a guard. I had watched a girl who had been silent for nearly a year choose, of all the people in a city, the one man who would not move and would not speak, the safest, stillest, most patient thing in the entire square, a man who would never rush her or pity her or ask her how she was feeling and risk a question on him. Are you real? Of course she asked him. He was the only thing in the world that was guaranteed not to react, not to make a fuss, not to do the thing every well-meaning adult had been doing to her for 11 months, which was to lean down with a worried face and wait for her to perform a recovery she didn't have. She asked the statue because the statue was safe. And the statue had looked down and given her a 1/4 inch of a smile, and that had been gentle enough, small enough, undemanding enough, to be the thing that finally cracked the door of an 11-month silence. He hadn't known any of that, of course. He couldn't have. To Corporal Wren she was simply a small, lost child inside his rope who had dropped her toy, and he had done the one small, kind thing his post permitted. He had no idea he had just given a grieving mother her daughter's voice back. That, I have come to think, is the whole of him, and the whole of all of them, the men in the red and the black. They do their small disciplined kindnesses without knowing what those kindnesses land on, because the discipline means you do the right small thing regardless of whether anyone will ever know it mattered. He moved a rabbit 4 inches. He thought it was nothing. It was the largest thing anyone did in that city all week. Now the loud man. I had assumed he'd slunk off, the way a man does when his joke has been spoiled. But he hadn't. He was standing apart, near the flag vendor, watching the family, and his linen jacket suddenly looked less like money and more like a costume of its own, a man dressed up as the kind of person who has it all figured out. After a while he came over awkwardly, the way a large, confident man becomes awkward when he is about to do something humble and isn't practiced at it. He spoke to the mother. I was close enough to hear. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, and his big square voice had gone careful. I was filming earlier, being a fool honestly, saying things about the guard." He cleared his throat. "I have it on my phone, the whole thing, him with your little girl. The rabbit and her saying thank you, I caught all of it." He held the phone like it was suddenly heavy. "I thought you might want it, so she has it, when she's older to know." He stopped. "And I'll delete the other part, me being that, you don't need that part." The mother looked at this stranger and at his phone, and at her daughter who was talking, and she did the most generous thing I saw all day. She didn't make him grovel. She just said, "Thank you. Yes." She'd love that. And she gave him her number to send it to, and the loud man, who I will stop calling the loud man now, because he had stopped being him, tapped at his phone with the concentration of a boy doing his homework right for once, and sent her the video of the moment he had tried to ruin, and had instead been lucky enough to record. I watched him do it. And I thought, this is the part of the story no one will believe, that the cynic was converted not by being humbled but by being shown. Nobody dressed him down. The guard never looked at him, never answered his snapping fingers, never gave him the satisfaction of a reaction he could have turned into more content. The crowd never rounded on him. He converted himself. The moment he really saw, that the thing he'd been mocking as empty was in fact so full that a 5-year-old had found her voice in front of it. You cannot keep calling a man a coat stand once you've watched a child speak to him for the first time in a year. The cynicism just falls off you, like a coat you're suddenly too warm for. He came and stood near me at the rope afterward, both of us watching the new sentry, and he said, not really to me, "I do that, make the joke. Decide the thing's empty so I don't have to." He didn't finish. Then he said, "I've got a boy. He's 7. I haven't," and he didn't finish that either. But he was looking at Posy and her rabbit and her unlocked voice. And I understood he was thinking about windows and rooms and men who go still and call it strength. And the cost of being a coat stand to the people who are waiting at your particular window for someone to come. "That guard noticed her," he said finally, "through all of it. While I was being through all of that, he was watching that kid. He clocked the rabbit before she did." He shook his head slowly. "You can't fake that. There's no way to train a man to notice a 5-year-old's heartbreak from the corner of his eye. That's not discipline, that's a person. He searched for it, a really kind person holding very still." He laughed, but it wasn't the laugh from before. It had nothing cheap in it. I called him dead inside. He was the most alive man in this square. I just couldn't see it because he wasn't performing it for me. I did stay long enough to learn a little more about Corporal Aldi's Wren, because by now I had to know. The sergeant who had carried Posy back, her name was Sergeant Vey, came out through the small wicket gate a while later, off her duty in a plain coat, and the family was still there, and there were thanks to be said. I attached myself to the edge of it shamelessly. And Sergeant Vey, who turned out to be the kind of person who will talk to a curious stranger if he's polite, told us a few things while Posy showed the rabbit his new home, which was apparently her hat. Wren was 34. He'd stood the Hartlin Gate for 6 years. Before that, she said, he'd been in a different sort of soldiering, the sort she didn't go into and I didn't ask about, the sort that teaches a man to be very, very still and to notice everything in a space at once, every figure, every movement, every wrongness, a skill, she said, that they all kept and turned to gentler uses once they came to the gate. "It's why he saw her," Vey said. "He sees everyone. He sees the whole square all the time. People think he's staring at nothing. He's not. He's reading every soul in the place. He knew where that child was before she went under the rope. He'd been keeping half an eye on her for 10 minutes. The dropping of the rabbit didn't surprise him. He'd been ready to do something kind for that kid since she first wandered off because, and here Vay said the thing I have kept, because that's the job no one writes down. Anybody can stand still. What we actually do is stand still, and watch asterisk, so that on the one morning it matters, we're already looking the right way. But why does it have to look like nothing? The mother asked. Why couldn't he just pick it up, smile at her, say hello? Why the foot? Why 2 words? She wasn't complaining. She was trying to understand the man who'd given her back her daughter. Sergeant Vay thought about it. Because the stillness is the gift, she said, not the obstacle to the gift. If he'd broken his post, picked her up, made a fuss, knelt down, he'd have made it about him. The big soldier being kind to the sad little girl for the crowd. And she'd have felt it. Children feel pity like a draft under a door. It's the thing she'd been drowning in for a year. What she needed was someone who would not make a fuss of her. Who would treat her like she mattered exactly the same as everyone else in his square, no more. No special sad child handling, no leaning down with the worried face. He gave her the dignity of the smallest possible kindness. 4 inches, 2 words. As if she were any other citizen of the kingdom he was keeping safe, no different, no broken. That's why it reached her when nothing else could. Because for the first time in 11 months, somebody treated her like she wasn't a tragedy. She was just a kid who dropped her rabbit, and a man helped her get it back, and that was all, and it was everything. I have turned that over a great many times since. The kindness was asterisk in the discipline, not in spite of it. The restraint wasn't the wall around the man's heart. The restraint was how the heart got through to a child too frightened to be reached any other way. I should tell you what came after, because it didn't end in the square. The video the converted cynic took, the one he sent to Posey's mother, the mother kept it private mostly, which I think speaks well of all of them. But she did show it to Posey's doctors, because they wanted to understand what had broken the silence, and she did show it once, at a small gathering, to some other parents whose children carried their own locked-up griefs. And from there a clipped version of it, 60 seconds, no faces of the family shown, went a little way around, not viral. Nothing so loud as that, just passed quietly hand to hand among the kind of people who needed to see it. A child asks a statue if he's real. The statue's eyes come down, a rabbit falls, a boot nudges it back, a small voice says thank you. And the man in the red tunic, eyes forward, says he's safe. I don't know how many silences that little film has cracked since. I know of one for certain. The household, when they heard about it, and they hear about everything that happens at their gates, did a thing that I find quietly perfect. They did not give Corporal Wren a medal. There is no medal for nudging a rabbit 4 inches. They did not move him to a softer post or put him in front of cameras or let the newspaper that came sniffing tell the story with his name on it. He declined the newspaper himself, I'm told, with a single sentence. It was the child who did something brave, not me. Talked to her in 20 years. What they did was enter a note in his file. Sergeant Vay told me this last, almost shyly. The note recorded that on a warm morning at the Hartlin Gate, a sentry under sustained provocation maintained his post without fault, and in the same watch, rendered a small assistance to a member of the public in distress in a manner consistent with the dignity of his post, and that the 2 things, the holding firm and the reaching out, were recorded together, in one line on purpose, so that any guardsman reading the file in years to come would understand that they were never 2 different things at all. They were the same thing. They were the whole job, the standing still and the 4 inches, the man who would not react to the fool and the man who saw the child, the same man, the only kind worth putting at the gate. There is one more thing I have to set down, because it is the part that finished the job of changing me, and because it happened to the new sentry, the one who took Corporal Wren's place when the watch changed. And so it taught me that the thing I had seen was not a single man's secret but the whole regiment's. After Wren marched off, a fresh guardsman stepped onto the worn grooves and became the statue. He was younger, I thought, by the line of his jaw, though under the bearskin they are hard to age. The crowd had thinned by then. The show was over in the public's mind, the famous changing of the watch ceremony done, and the new man stood his box in the quieting square with the same impossible stillness, eyes forward, reading his nothing. And I confess that even after everything I had just watched, some lazy part of my mind reset itself to the old caption. There's the next one. Empty. On guard over an empty square. The belief is that comfortable. It grows back like a weed the moment you stop pulling it. But I had learned to watch differently now, and so I kept my eye on the young sentry, and within a few minutes I was rewarded, because the square is never as empty as it looks, and there is always, it turns out, someone at the window. An old man came slowly across the forecourt on 2 sticks. He was very old, the kind of old that makes every step a small expedition, and he was alone, and he was wearing, pinned to a worn coat that did not otherwise suit a warm day, a single row of faded campaign ribbons. He made his careful way toward the rope near the young sentry's box, and he stopped there, and he stood, not filming, not pointing, not snapping his fingers, just standing, looking up at the guardsman with an expression I could not read from where I was. And then, with enormous effort, gripping both sticks in one shaking hand to free the other, the old man straightened his bent back as far as it would go, and brought his trembling free hand up to the brim of an invisible cap, and held a salute. It was not a good salute. The hand wavered. The elbow would not come up to the proper angle. It was the salute of a body that had given a great deal and had little left. But it was offered with the whole of him, and it was offered to a young man he had never met, for no reason I could see except that the young man wore the uniform of a thing the old man had once been part of and still, after all the years, loved. I watched the new sentry's eyes. I had learned in one morning exactly what to look for, and I saw them come down slowly, deliberately, the great head never moving, and find the old man's face and hold there. And I saw, in the perfect economy of a disciplined man, the new sentry do the only thing his post permitted him to do in answer to a veteran's salute. He could not raise his own hand. Both were occupied with the rifle, and the post does not return salutes from the box. He could not speak, the rules held him, but he straightened. Where Wren had let out a quarter-inch of a smile for the child, this young man took up a half-inch of additional height for the old soldier, drew himself fractionally taller, sharper, more correct. The way you make yourself worthy of a thing you have just been given. And he held the old man in his eyes for a long 3 seconds, and then brought his gaze back to the front. And the old man, satisfied, lowered his shaking hand and turned, and began the long expedition back across the stones. Nobody else saw it, I think. There was no crowd to gasp, no phone to catch it, no little girl to make it a story. It was a thing that passed between 2 soldiers in an emptying square, the very old one and the very young one, neither of them able to speak to the other, and it was over in 5 seconds, and it was as complete a conversation as I have ever witnessed. "Thank you for what you are," the old man said with his shaking hand. "I am honored to be it," the young man said by standing taller. Not a word, not a step out of place, and so much said. And I understood, finally and for good, that the man at the window is not an exception. He is the rule. There is one behind every one of those carved faces, in every box, on every post, reading every square, waiting at every window, and the stillness is never the absence of the man. The stillness is the man, holding so much so carefully that it takes a child's true question or an old soldier's shaking salute to show you, for one unguarded second, the size of what is held. I went home after the wedding, and I did not stop thinking about it. I think about the loud man who I hope went home and opened his own son's door and sat down. I think about Sergeant Vey, reading the whole square while she looks like she's looking at nothing. I think about the household's one-line note, the 2 things written down together on purpose. But mostly I think about the 4 inches, and the 2 words, and the eyes coming down. We had all decided there was no one home. That was the comfortable thing to decide, because if there's no one home, then you can say what you like and it's free, it costs nothing. There's no one on the other end to wound. The loud man decided it loudly, and the rest of us decided it silently, by saying nothing, and we were all of us wrong in exactly the same way. There was someone home. There is always someone home. The whole terrible discipline of the man, the stillness we mistook for emptiness, the silence we mistook for absence, was not the proof that no one was there. It was the proof of how much was, held under so much control that you had to be 5 years old and unafraid, and carrying a worn gray rabbit to knock on the right window and find out. A child found the man in the statue. The rest of us, the grown and the clever and the cynical, had stood in front of him for 10 minutes and seen nothing but stone. It took someone who hadn't yet learned that statues are empty to walk up and ask the only question that mattered. Are you real? He was, he always was. He is standing there right now, I expect, eyes forward, reading his square, looking like the most empty man in the kingdom, and somewhere behind that face, watchful and warm and waiting, is the most full one. And one of these mornings, some small, frightened person is going to wander under the rope and ask him a true question, and the eyes are going to come down, and the corner of the mouth is going to move its quarter-inch, and a window no one knew was there is going to open onto a room no one knew was full. That is the thing I carried home, the thing I have given to everyone who will sit still for it. The thing the little girl in the yellow hat taught a whole forecourt of strangers without knowing she taught us anything at all. Do not mistake a man's stillness for his emptiness. The quietest, most controlled, most carved from stone person you will ever stand near may be the one with the most held inside, and the kindest, and the most awake. And the way you find out is not to wave your hand in his face and snap your fingers and call him a coat stand. The way you find out is to be gentle, and to be true, and to ask him, as if you really wanted to know, whether he is real. He is, he always is. There was never anyone who wasn't. I keep the one photograph I took, the statue with no one home, on a shelf where I see it every day. And every time I look at it I correct the caption in my head, the way the strangers in the square corrected theirs, the way the loud man corrected his, the way I had to correct mine. No one home, I draw a line through it, and under it I write the truer thing, the thing a 5-year-old with a rabbit knew before any of us. Somebody's in there, knock gently, he'll come to the window. He came to hers. I watched him do it. I will believe in the man in the statue for the rest of my life.